Yeah. As I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm never quitting on my mission. I'ma roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you going, better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain. Keep on working, open curtains, haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. Whoa. I'm never gonna give up, fall down, I just gotta get up.
You're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show on WNHHLP 103.5 FM, your home for community radio.
Good morning, everybody. And Harry, thank you for that intro. Harry's our station manager at WNHH. And really, we were just talking before we went on air about optimism and staying hopeful, and also staying pragmatic and sober, and also strategic in terms of how do we live our lives moving forward. You've done a few shows with the Yale Center for Clinical Investigation, and really the general title has been Take Ownership of Your Health, Your Life Depends Upon It. Some people have mentioned to me that seems too dramatic, but I got to tell you, I really feel it's not trying to get to be dramatic or just to get your attention. It's trying to state a real fact that you must take ownership of your health and your life and your family's life and your future life of others in your family tree. It does depend on what actions you take today. And this was way before something called COVID-19 kind of entered our psyche and our psychosis and our worldview. But today we're going to really have the chance to focus on the real deal about this impact of COVID and clinical research at Yale pertaining to COVID. And we're really blessed to have one of the leading researchers in this area, Dr. Charles De La Cruz, with us. We're joined by members of the Yale Center for Clinical Investigation, Keisha Johnson, as well as one of the AME Zion Cultural Ambassadors, Reverend Alvin Clayton. The shows have been really, some would say, in terms of this partnership, to raise awareness, to share information about health promotion topics, but it's also to take advantage and to learn about what cutting edge clinical research means to you, your family, and your community, and particularly communities of color and the elderly. As I mentioned, Dr. Charles De La Cruz has joined us, and he, in addition to being a doctor, he has a PhD, and he's the Associate Professor of Medicine, Pulmonary, Critical Care, and Sleep Medicine, and of Microbiopathogenesis. Reverend Clayton, the Genesis part is not for the Bible, but they just kind of borrowed that term and kind of expanded in terms of a medical standpoint. But I make a little bit of a joke because the pathogenesis does pertain to some of the origination. How far do we go back? Where does it start? How can we investigate original stimulus, so to speak? But at any rate, Dr. De La Cruz is director also of the Center for Pulmonary Infection Research and Treatment and at the Yale School of Medicine. And as I say, we're joined by Reverend Alvin Clayton, pastor of Walters Memorial AME Zion Church located in Bridgeport, who is also a cultural ambassador to the Yale Clinical Research Program. Dr. De La Cruz, thank you so much for joining us, and really looking forward to these next 48 or so minutes, 50 minutes, to talk about this pandemic. I call it a global war, but it's a pandemic, and people should know that you've devoted your life prior to COVID in terms of pneumonia and infectious diseases and germs and just the lungs, just such a vital part of our having a human existence. And now we have this COVID thing where it seems to me your life passion is even more of a paramount importance. So welcome this morning.
Thank you very much, Tom, and for the invitation. And it's a privilege to participate in this discussion. And it's also an important and timely discussion. I never thought that we would be at this stage in a pandemic. We read about it historically about 100 years ago with the influenza pandemic and how that affected globally. My training in infectious disease, virology, microbiology, in terms of research, led me to clinical training as a pulmonologist and critical care doctor, meaning taking care of patients in the intensive care unit. And in the past 10 or so years, my research have been focused on respiratory infection, and we've been studying influenza, bacterial infections. And one of the striking things that I realize is that there aren't that many attention and focus and funding with regards to pneumonia or lung infections. The different kinds of infections that we get, both nationally and globally, in terms of respiratory infection and pneumonia, actually has not given the respect it deserves. People take it lightly. Funders don't take it seriously. And so for the past many years, I've worked with my colleagues to really raise awareness about pneumonia. This is even prior to COVID-19. And it's unfortunate that COVID-19 happened, and we are faced with this new reality. And we need to learn about what we've learned from before, but also much of the stuff that we've learned since this beginning of this pandemic, how to prevent these infections, how to treat these infections, and how to go forward from this standpoint. And so I'm sort of in the middle of this, looking at sort of my training as if, like, I think my career has sort of prepared me to tackle this from different aspects. And so I feel obligated and dedicated to make sure that we tackle this in the right way.
And thank you for sharing that in terms of the context, as well as perhaps even the destiny and the reason for us being here this morning. Tisha, weigh in a little bit about why this topic kind of how it resonates with you and Dr. Dela Cruz's role vis-a-vis the YCCI.
Yeah, it's been really important. Charles actually is one of our former scholars. So part of the program, I think we've discussed before, is to really identify our faculty at the early stages of their career and make sure that they have all the tools that they need to become successful clinical researchers. And we're just so proud that Charles is one of the byproducts of the program. And he's now leading not only research teams focused on COVID. Hoping he'll talk a little bit later in the show about a study that he's leading where he's the national PI of one of the COVID-19 therapeutic clinical trials that's coming. But also really important, I think, to acknowledge Charles early in the pandemic, meeting with the cultural ambassadors and speaking to Reverend Clayton and others. They really wanted to know what was happening in our local community. You know, who's in the hospital, who's taking care of the patients in the hospital who have COVID? How are we making these really incredibly tough clinical decisions at the beginning of this pandemic when we were all just figuring it out? And Charles was kind enough and gracious enough, many times coming on the show, mass from the hospital to help us, but meeting with the community leaders weekly to talk about the treatment options, to talk about the treatment teams, because what we have today in your show guest, and I'm so proud to say this, is not only someone who is doing research, but actually taking care of COVID patients in the hospital and caring for it and saving lives every day. So we have one of our COVID heroes on the show today. And I want to take this time to say thank you to Charles, not only for the incredible clinical efforts, but also for his research efforts to try to find a cure to combat COVID.
Reverend Clayton, and you'd like to kind of weigh in as well? Are we encountering technical?
Good morning.
Good morning, Reverend Clayton. I know you were saying your prayer there before you came on, so I'll pray for you. You pray for me.
That is so true. But I'm so grateful to be here today with Dr. Dela Cruz and with Sister Tisha Johnson, who have been a tremendous asset and blessing to our community and YCCI. But I want to add to this portion, I believe, that Yale itself has done a great job of educating our community and building bridges in the community during this time of stress, I call it, through health fairs and flyers and posters. And it didn't happen overnight. It started before the pandemic. Mm-hmm. You know, a couple of years back, we had flu clinics, on-site flu clinics, in our local churches, and some of them, and we've had during the summer you had picnics with all type of activities for people of all ages, great food, uh, face painting for children, and at the same time with all types of pamphlets and information about ongoing trials at Yale.
Mm-hmm.
So when Corona-19 came, Yale was already the leading source of information in the city. And we, as teacher said earlier, we met earlier with the ambassadors, community leaders, doctors, and administrators of the hospital that helped navigate through this trying time. And so many people are grateful for this.
Indeed, well said. Absolutely. Dr. Dela Cruz, maybe let's jump in. Tisha's reference, when she said PI, that's principal investigator.
Yes.
You're the principal investigator for a clinical trial, and I mean, there's always been controversy, discussion about participation in clinical trials, but I got to tell you, they're going to go on. We need it. People forget about the words polio and measles, and you mentioned influenza. So, but share with us what bring us up to speed in terms of this particular clinical trial that you're involved with as the PI.
Yeah, so specifically for the outpatient who are subjects, are patients in the community who have been infected with COVID-19. Currently, there is no FDA-approved treatments if you get sick with the COVID-19. Most of the time, we tell you to stay at home and wait until you develop symptoms. And even if you have mild symptoms, most of the time we watch it over the phone and have you call or go to the hospital if you develop more severe symptoms. And so right now there's a great need in terms of figuring out whether we have a drug that could be used to prevent the progression of COVID-19 if you develop mild symptoms in the community. And so there are several trials going on. The ones that we've been involved with is actually an antiviral medication. It's from a sponsor or a company that is local here to Connecticut, has been working with Yale quite often in terms of many different projects. And it's actually this drug, antiviral, has been shown independently by other investigators to be one of the targets that has really promising antiviral effects when they tested in the laboratories. And it's been also used relatively safely for other indications. And currently, we are looking for individuals, and we screen with YCCI who have been positive for COVID-19, who develop mild symptoms of fever, chills, cough, congestion, for example, headaches. They could have GI symptoms like nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. Some people lose their sense of smell. And so these are some of the symptoms who people develop within 8 days of symptoms and have been positive for COVID-19. They qualify for this outpatient COVID-19 trial where they get this medication compared to a placebo, which means it's a sugar pill. And what we want to find out is whether this decreases the viral load and whether this prevents progression of symptoms. And why is this important? This is important because we really want to have a more preventative way to approach with COVID-19. I see patients in the ICU. They're severely ill. They require mechanical ventilator. They have organ failures. And so some of these patients who end up in the ICU or even in the hospital have had their diseases progress. And we have several medications for that, and I can discuss that a little bit later. From an outpatient setting, we really don't have any options and choices for our patients in the community, other than in the setting of clinical trials. And this drug that we are involved with is called apilimod, and has really quite potent antiviral effects. And Tom, you mentioned earlier about the word genesis and the word pathogenesis, right? And pathogenesis means what are the steps towards having the infection toward and then leading towards disease? What are the different steps? Once you get infected, what happens to your body to develop disease or not, right? And so a lot of people are really trying to understand pathogenesis. And for antiviral, which means these drugs targets the virus to clear it, to get rid of it. We need to treat them early in the phase of this infection, and which is why we're targeting patients who have early symptoms in the community, and we don't want to wait until they develop more severe disease. If you understand, and so yeah, and so I think this is really important piece of the puzzle that we don't have currently in the way we treat COVID-19. We have several drugs that already have shown some promise for patients who are hospitalized. We also have several drugs, vaccines that are underway, including some activities here at Yale with the help of the Reverend and the Ambassador Program for vaccination to prevent you getting it for people who are healthy. But we really don't have a lot of options for people who are infected, mild symptoms in the community. And this drug that we feel is quite promising is something that we are working towards for this trial. We involving other sites with the help of Tisha and the YCCI for enrollments. And I think we can give some information later on about how to participate for people who are interested.
Well, Tisha and Reverend Clayton, let's share that information now because it's radio and people, we know that they're glued to their tablet or their phone and watching our show for 48 straight minutes, but sometimes they do have to break away. So we'll certainly will repeat it. But how folks can participate to share that information now would still be relevant.
All of our clinical trials that are open to participation are listed on the Yale Clinical Studies website. So if you're interested, you can dial it's called our Help Us Discover phone line. It's 877-978-8343. They can also email at helpusdiscover@yale.edu. And if you forget that, you can just search yalestudies.org and you can see a link to find a clinical trial, and all of the available clinical trials, including COVID trials, are there by category. Or if you're a patient within the health system and you have MyChart, you can go into your MyChart patient portal and you can click on the research tab and the available studies are there. You can also feel free to build a profile and to alert the team that you would like to be contacted about future opportunities, not only this COVID trial, but also for diabetes or hypertension or any of the other studies that we have available.
Tisha, that's really, I know you're frozen on my screen. Can people hear me? Yes, no, maybe, okay. Charles, I see you nodding. Did everyone hear what Tisha said in terms of the enrollment? Great, because I'm so frozen on mine. Let me continue talking. Charles, this is really important. I'm going to try to put it into layperson's terms again. Does your doctor, your general doctor, have to recommend you? If I go to a doctor and say, I think I have flu COVID symptoms, does my doctor have to refer me to participate in the trial, or can I call on my own?
Yes, that's a great question, Tom. You can call it on your own. If your doctor tells you you have COVID, that you have some symptoms, but we don't have any treatment, and you don't need to come to the hospital yet. And if they're interested in participating in the trial, they should contact us from the information that Tisha Johnson has provided, and to reach us directly, and then our coordinators will reach out to you to make sure that you qualify, and explain to you some of the more details about the trials.
This is just so important. Say a little more, because I don't think people understand I'm still grappling, struggling with the long-term effects of what this pandemic means. So from a year from now, can you still imagine that someone might be have partial symptoms and still, when does this clinical trial end? Will it be additional ones? I'm just, the short and long term of what the dilemma that we're in, I think it still gets confusing people like crazy.
Yeah, so the trial we're involved in is currently looking at 140 patients. And after that, there will likely be more of these trials. There also likely be more other types of clinical trials for the outpatient, for example. We hope that this pandemic will be limited for a short period. However, until we know the vaccine really works, until we have immunity in the population, I don't think we're out of the woods yet. And certainly we're reaching into a phase currently in the wintertime where we're seeing uptick of this and of this infection. And it is more important than any time now to be more protective because it's getting colder outside. People are staying indoor more. And I think the likelihood of getting infected and spreading is actually higher. We also have other respiratory viruses that is circulating, right? The influenza is coming. And so these are all important factors that make it a little bit challenging for this coming winter. And so I think participating in these trials, I think will be important to find out whether or not we have an options for treatment for the outpatient, Tom.
And this might be ad nauseum for you, Dr. Dela Cruz, but tell people again what the basic recommendation about if you want to protect yourself, your family, and the world, what you should be doing.
Right. So I think it's most important is prevention and to stay ahead. We need to make sure to wear masks, social distancing, 6 feet apart if possible, stay away from crowds. And unfortunately, I know for some members of the community, these options are not easy to follow, right? Because we know, and certain minority groups, and including the African American population, they have to go to work. They're at the front lines. They have to take the public transportation. They live with many family members, and so I think this is especially important for certain communities to really stay ahead and be careful because of this infection. And so not to scare everybody, but I think we need to respect this virus, to wear masks, again, social distancing if possible, not stay in large crowds. In fact, I think more recently in the news, people are talking about even small social gatherings are some of the outbreaks are coming from. And so I think in addition, we're coming into this respiratory season, make sure everyone get their flu shots to prevent getting another virus, right? The so-called double hit with coronavirus and influenza. I think these are all very important. I think it's important also to wash your hands and sort of follow proper hygiene practices.
Thanks for sharing that. People are already talking on the street or in their homes, or just you hear in the general discussion and conversation with people, since this whole issue of health and contagion, there's a lot of street talk, there's a lot of clinical talk, there's a lot of news talk, there's a lot of information and disinformation coming from our elected officials. The flu shot, does it make you sick? Why do I have to take it? Does it eliminate you're getting the flu, or does it just decrease your possibility?
Great question, Tom. I think I think everyone is encouraged to take flu shot. At all ages, and the reason for that is it sort of the flu that we saw last year is a little different from this year, and so the vaccines are different every year. And so I got mine a couple of weeks ago, and what it does is actually boost your immune system so that if you get the influenza virus, it will either clear it so that you don't get infected, and if you do get it, your symptoms will be much milder, and so you can stay away from the hospital and get severe disease. Prior to COVID-19, flu has caused a lot of mortality as well, and so we forget that it's a bad virus to get, and so I think it's important to be vigilant as well. What's interesting is that because of the social distancing and mask practices in some parts of the world, the southern hemisphere, the number of influenza cases have been lower. And so it goes to show how important it is to have the practice of mask wearing, social distancing to prevent these sort of contagious viruses.
And if I can just stay on the flu shot issue for a second, and Reverend Clayton, I'll come to you in a minute. How you mentioned that Dr. Dela Cruz, that you had your flu shot recently. Should people get it now? Should they wait until December? Is there a high peak? Is there the timing kind of thing?
I think right now is a good time because people were talking about getting the flu shot much earlier, for example, which is perfectly great, fine. I think it's recommended only for a one-time shot, anyways. I think right now is a good time because I think the peak of influenza, if you look at previous years, is usually around December, January. So if you do it, I think right now, especially it's not too cold outside, would be a great time to get your flu shot. I think people can still go and do it all the way till the new year.
And it takes a week or so for it to kick in for the potency, so to speak?
Usually 2 weeks, yes.
And flu shots are annual.
Right.
And this might be an unfair question or too much of a speculative question for you, but once we have a COVID vaccine, would that have to be, would that become annual in your mind as well?
That's an interesting question, Tom. I think, what we've learned for these many years with influenza is that influenza mutates quite rapidly. And so, in fact, the flu shot that we get are from 4 different strains of influenza. And so they try to predict what we will be getting this year to cover the bases, right? And so every year, the components of that flu shot is different because the virus, influenza virus, mutates. Fortunately, COVID-19 virus, which is the SARS-CoV-2 virus, even though it mutates some, it doesn't mutate as fast and as influenza. And so I hope that we don't need yearly COVID-19 vaccines. I think we still need to wait for the results of these current vaccines, which has shown some promising results so far, that it would be enough. And so I think because of the rate of mutation of this COVID-19 virus, I don't suspect it'll be like an influenza vaccine in terms of yearly, but I don't know yet. So until we find out.
Well said. Well said. No, and that's in terms of even the reason I'm halfway joking and not putting you on the spot is science is still a discovery. Tisha mentioned the word discovery and take ownership of yourself. So people, I think we neglect that we're all on this path of scientific discovery and not to. So just elaborate on that, just that whole process. I mean, you devoted your life to investigations, to trials, to research, to looking in the looking at the cells, et cetera, and seeing people die and knowing their charts when you look into their eyes, knowing the progression of their illness.
Right. So what we know so far, and it's unfortunately not too surprising, is when the pandemic hit New Haven, disproportionately we saw a large number of African Americans as patients admitted to the hospital. This also included our Latinx population. 30%, 20% of the patients admitted were from those groups. And then this is very similar to what's been reported nationally. And if you go to the CDC, they report sort of African Americans are 3 times more likely to get infected compared to their white counterparts, and also twice as likely to die compared to their white counterparts. And so these are quite sobering data, right? And so what Yale has done early in the pandemic, the hospital has a team to look at what are the best treatment options for patients who are admitted to the hospital. And they created an algorithm and say, if you have this problem or oxygen need, use this drug. And then if you get worse, use that drug. And this is in the context of a time, if you remember, where we didn't have a lot of information. The data was still coming out. People are still doing the studies. We're still unclear, right? And so But the good thing about that algorithm, it's sort of, in my mind, it sort of evened the playing field a little bit because everyone who came in, no matter what background they were from, how old they were, they got the similar treatment. And the result of that, Tom, was that even though disproportionately more African American and Latino X population who were admitted, in terms of mortality, they were very similar to other groups, which is what we sort of what you wanted to achieve, right? What it means is that if you show up in our hospital, the care you get is similar, and at least from the Yale New Haven system. And I think that's the kind of thing we want to achieve with clinical trials, right? We want to have similar attention. We want a similar evaluation. We want to know similar results from the different population to see the new drugs, does it work or not in different groups. And so I think it's really critical. That's why we have this discussion today for the groups that are less represented to participate in these trials so that physicians like myself and my colleagues will know, does this work on this population or not? And I think it's really important. I think Yale has been a wonderful environment with all the initiatives. They're very sensitive about these. There's many programs. People are emotionally and committed to this, not only from professional side of things, because they actually see they take care of these patients. And they want the best outcome for everyone in the community.
Indeed. And Tisha, if I might elaborate a little bit more, because it's this issue of trust and confidence, and people know about other historical negative experiments, so to speak, and research that's taken place on Black and Brown communities. But we are, in my mind, at a key point of people sometimes being maybe forced to take a leap of faith, or seeking more information, or just understanding that this is a critical moment for all of us. And if we're not involved, we're going to be left behind. I mean, that's my simple way of saying it. And I'm not trying to dismiss people's perception of reality and their belief systems, but the importance of being involved. I mean, I'm at a loss for a word. If you're not part of the process, you're going to be forgotten about. I mean, that's maybe an oversimplification.
No, you're right. I think even in the formation of our partnership in the early days, one of the most important points was the education. I know that's something that Reverend Clayton will stress when he comments, but having the information to make a decision. And I think one of the things that individuals in the community forget when it comes to clinical trials is the requirement by the FDA for approval is that you have the right number of patients in the trial to determine its effectiveness. When you look at that population data, so does this drug or device work in all populations equally, in all ages equally, in all genders equally? The only way to have that information and to judge it is if those populations have participated in clinical research. And so if you don't have a population, as we have had historically with lack of minority participation in clinical trials, what that means is you don't have the best effective data. So as a physician, once that drug or device is approved for all use, that's really when you're going to start to see some of that data. Hopefully the FDA has required some long-term safety data, and maybe you'll get to find through use if this drug or device is effective. Whereas if populations have participated, what we'll find, you'll even see it if you look at some of the approvals that the FDA has. You can see this yourself on, it's called the Fda Snapshot, and the FDA actually reports out on the levels of participation by different subpopulations, including age. So, you think of the elderly are actually underrepresented in lots of cases in clinical trials. But what you'll find is if there were enough participants, like there's a drug that got approved last year, I think in the mental health space, and there were a large number of minority participants in that study. And what they found was there was higher impact in one of the drugs, the safety effects. And so there's a modification to the label saying that if you're African American, you may tend to see more headaches with this drug than in other populations. But that's data that all came from a clinical trial. So without the appropriate participation, there's no way of knowing whether it has the same safety impact, the same efficacy across all populations, across all age ranges. And so it's very important. But I'd say the most important information for the public is to have the information, to have the education, to do your homework, to understand the informed consent process that Dr. Dela Cruz mentioned earlier, where the regulatory approval bodies that are put in place that include lay individuals to say, is this a safe study to do in the population? Explain all of the risks in clear language that's understandable. That's what's really important. Get the information and make a decision and make a judgment, but understand the importance of diverse participation in clinical trials by all ages, races, and ethnicities.
That's so important. Reverend Clayton, we referenced your name and we want to give you your equal time before we pass the collection plate. So I wanted to, I know, it's Monday. I gotta have a look.
We have Givelify and Cash App now. So.
Cash App. All right.
But Tisha explained that very, very well. What I will say at this time is that, especially in the Black community, when you start talking about clinical research, the first thing that pops up out of people's mouths is the Tuskegee situation. And people will say that I'm not a guinea pig. And so when we start sharing with persons about clinical research, there's a wall that goes up or some blockage that they don't want to take part in the research. But as Tisha just said, it is so important that all people participate in the clinical trials so that the medicines will work properly in each person. We can't get around it. There's no way of getting around it. If Blacks and Latinos don't participate, the medicines will not work as well in our bodies. And just to go back a bit with the COVID-19, early this morning, I heard on one of the news stations that a group of people rented a house and 25 people or so were gathered. And 16 out of the 25 tested positive for corona. And those that did not were those that for some reason spent more time outside. I mention that because Thanksgiving and Christmas, the holiday season is coming. We have to remain steady and vigilant and making sure that, as Dr. Dela Cruz said earlier, keep our mask on, make sure that we social distance, and wash your hands. I mean, these are things that we must do to keep ourselves safe. This pandemic is nothing to play with. We've lost so many people, and so many lives have been shattered because of it. And I think we can do far better if we just follow those simple rules. Wash your hands, keep your mask on, and don't let your guard down just because we're entering the holiday season.
Indeed, I know, Reverend Clayton, I'm suffering from the fatigue of this situation, and I'm not alone. And we can all become lazy as human beings. Dr. Dela Cruz, we have about 18 or so more minutes. Let's see. I wonder if there's anything on your heart, mind, and soul as you kind of have engaged us and embraced us during this show. Anything you'd like to mention or that you concern that you might have?
Yeah, I just wanted to reflect what Reverend Clayton just said. I think we're months into this pandemic. We've heard about many different newses, contradicting news. We also are fatigued, right? We're fatigued at staying at home, social distancing. I got an email this weekend from our intensive care staff, and this Wednesday they have a memorial Zoom for the patients who have died in our ICU, and that's really sobering. I think it affects the physicians, the nurses, the staff. It impacts, I'm sure, extraordinarily to the family members who could not see their loved one die because of COVID-19. And COVID-19 also affects, not just one person. It affects multiple people in the same family sometimes. And it's something that we have never seen before, right? Flu doesn't really do this kind of stuff, right? And so I think I just want to reiterate what Reverend Clayton said, especially coming into holiday seasons, a winter season where we don't have more outdoor opportunities, and there's an uptick in the numbers now in the Northeast. This is really vital. It's actually life and death matter, and so I think everybody needs to take this seriously.
It's 11:45.
Dr. Dela Cruz, if I can I want to try this out on you. Maybe trying out on you is not the proper way to say it. So let me get spit it out. Speaking of spit, from a layperson standpoint, is it fair to say that we are germ makers? That the human body that we share, COVID would not exist without human beings, correct?
Right. I think yes. I think if there's no humans or human beings, right? COVID would not be around. Yes.
So we are the transmitters. We're walking either healers or murderers. I'm not trying, but I'm really at this desperate stage of trying to share and describe to people this issue.
Right. So for the virus to be able to survive, right? If you're the virus and you say, I want to duplicate, replicate, make more of myself, and then spread, right? And so the best way to do that is what they need is a cell, right? And so in this case, the way we get it is through our nose and mouth, and we breathe into it through our lungs. And those cells that line our lungs and nose, they're targets for the virus. And the virus will infect it. It makes more of it like a factory, and then it spreads, right? And so that's why the mask is really important, because if you're infected, you're making lots of virus. Having the mask prevents you from spreading to other people. Okay? And for some people, it's no big deal. They have no symptoms, right? Right? Most of the people are like that. For some people, they get some symptoms that are mild. And unfortunately, for 20% of the cases, they get symptoms worse enough that they can't breathe. Their oxygen is very low. They get organ failure. They get hospitalized, and some of them die. And so this virus has got the best of everything, right? Because it infects, right? It doesn't kill everybody, right? There are people who are 80% who are mild or no symptoms that allows them to spread to the whole community, right? If the virus killed 100% of the patients they infected, it's no good for the virus, right? The virus cannot spread, right? The patient dies and that's it, right? And that's why we heard about Ebola, right? Ebola
Yes.
in some parts of the world. And the fatality rate of Ebola was really high, like 30, 40%. Okay. And so it didn't really spread around because you were too sick to spread around and go to an airplane, go to a restaurant, right? This, unfortunately, for COVID-19, the symptoms for many patients are quite mild, and some of them don't have symptoms. So they get to like go all over the place and spread it to the different parts of the world and communities. And so that's why I think efforts to prevent this, including mass and social distancing, is so important, right?
Yes.
So countries have done well on that. Have really practiced it really strongly, like Vietnam, for example. You heard about New Zealand. Those countries have really implemented these rules really carefully.
And as we have another 5 or so minutes, talk about, I've been, I've read a few articles where even you're involved with lungs and pulmonary, that there's a residual. Some people still have, even if you think you've recovered, we're finding out that you really have not fully recovered, or there are lingering effects or lingering damage, and that still seems to be an open issue.
Yeah, that's very insightful, Tom. I think, people think that because it's a respiratory virus, right, it only causes lung problems. Um, what we've learned with this pandemic, that this virus can cause multiple problems. Headaches, we've seen strokes, for example, people develop blood clots, cardiac problems. Yale actually has a post-COVID clinic in our pulmonary section to follow these patients who recovered either from the hospital or from the community, even for mild symptoms. Many of them ended up having similar lingering symptoms of breathing problems. They can't concentrate. They feel fatigued. They never get better. These are the post-COVID syndrome that people have described. Some people call it the long haulers. And these are real. These are people still in our community, or people who are even listening in to this radio right now, who thought they might have had something like a COVID mild symptom, but they never really got better from it. And so this is an active area that people are still trying to figure out. And so that's why it's important to not get infected. That's also yeah, right, because we don't know what this virus does.
And Tisha and Reverend Clayton, if there's any closing remarks, and Reverend and Dr. Dela Cruz, you've been anointed and appointed a reverend today, just for this purpose of this show. So you have an additional name title. Any closing remarks or comments? And Dr. Dela Cruz, in yours, if you could include, people are kind of, I think, still confused about this word asymptomatic, that I can have it and still not be infected. That's so confusing, but maybe you could include that in your closing remarks. But Tisha, any closing remarks from you, and then Reverend Clayton, and then we'll give Dr. Dela Cruz the last word.
There's just two things, Tom. I want to again, stress the importance that these are clinical trials that we've talked about, and which means that it's a research study, and we want people to understand all of the possible risks and benefits of participation. We have a lot of information on our website, the Yale Clinical Studies website, the Yale Center for Clinical Investigation. There's a page with lots of information about our ambassadors and their efforts as well. But to get more information, the telephone number again is 877-978-8343, or email at helpusdiscover@yale.edu, or through my chart in the research tab. And I also wanted to comment briefly, Tom, about the idea of the COVID fatigue. We did discuss that a few weeks ago on your show with Dr. John Crystal, our head of psychiatry and mental health services at Yale. So I'll just ask people to refer to John's show if they feel like they need some help with thinking about this or experiencing those depressive symptoms from this. And so you've just done a wonderful service for the community by providing all of this health information, and we thank you for the partnership. And I'll turn it over to wonderful Reverend Clayton.
Thank you, Tisha. Such a joy to see you and hear this morning, and I want to thank Tom for allowing us to be on the show, and Dr. Dela Cruz, you knocked it out of the park. This is the pamphlet that I just want to let you see the cover. You can picture that. Help us discover. And the information that Tisha mentioned is right there. So let us make sure that we contact us to help us, especially people of color. We need all of us in the clinical trials and clinical research. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Dr. De La Cruz?
Yeah, thank you again for this opportunity to discuss with your listener about the importance of COVID-19 and COVID-19 trials. To address your earlier question about asymptomatic, what it means is that you could be infected with the virus and not have any symptoms at all. You feel fine, no big deal. That's nothing wrong with me, but you could be infected. And what that means is that you could be spreading it to your loved ones, somebody who are more susceptible, your grandmother, or somebody who have a medical problem. And so that's why it's important to wear a mask, no matter what you do, to have social distancing, because you yourself could be infected and you don't know it. And so it's asymptomatic, and that's perfectly fine because it doesn't affect you because you feel fine, but it does affect people around you. And so that's why it's important. And especially for people who know that they've been in an area where they've been in contact with somebody who was infected, they're more even likelier to have positive tests with no symptoms. So I think something to think about. And I think some of the last few words, I think for the opportunity to really reiterate the importance of more discussion. I think this ambassador program through the YCCI and through the opportunities through this radio show to connect with the community and your listener about to demystify what trials are, how important it is. Really, it's a partnership, right? We want to learn from the community what their needs are and how we can help them best. So that's really, I'm grateful. Thank you.
Dr. De La Cruz, Harry will play the music, so that'll be the one. He'll play it in about a minute or so. But I'm going to take advantage of this last minute. Talk to me about testing. Should I still get my COVID test?
Yeah, so I think if you develop symptoms, yes, you should get your COVID tests. Yale has sort of different programs. If you feel like you are infected because you know somebody who were infected or you've developed symptoms, there are different mechanisms to get tested through your doctors or through Yale New Haven Hospital COVID hotline, and I think it's if you and part of it is because if you do have symptoms and you're positive, there are opportunities for these clinical trials to participate in.
Excellent, excellent. What's future research for you? I mean, again, you had a life prior to COVID-19. Now your life has maybe been changed somewhat, but lung ailments and sleep research and things you've been involved with pre-COVID people are still coming to the hospital. I'm not making a joke, but we still get sick. We got sick before COVID. We're still getting sick. So we're going to need you and your expertise for a while. What's on your plate moving forward?
Yeah, I think I'll continue to be with relations to respiratory infection, how we could treat this acutely, and also how we can prevent chronic diseases. And so I think World Pneumonia Day comes in November 12th, and so I think it highlights pneumonia globally, and so for awareness, I think we just wrote a perspective piece about the importance of COVID-19 and pneumonia awareness globally. There are other parts of the world where they're not as fortunate, and so I think we want to raise awareness for those too. So
excellent. Well, I think Harry's making his presence known with the music in the background. I just want to thank everyone for this informative discussion. Tisha and Alvin and Dr. De La Cruz, hope to see you guys soon, either virtually or maybe sometime in church. Who knows? Whatever the case might be. Or in Puerto Rico or somewhere, Spain, somewhere. That's fun. Thank you, everybody. Harry, thank you as always for kind of managing the ship as the station manager for WNHH. Take care, everyone. Stay healthy, stay wise, stay proactive.
Thank you.
Fall down out of sky.